Ladies and gentlemen, President Trump just conducted the single largest purge of Washington, D.C. deep state swamp beasts that we have ever seen, and honestly, this changes everything. Now, as many of you know, since stepping back into the White House, President Trump has had to deal with a never ending series of deep state leakers that have been actively working to undermine his America First agenda. In fact, to give you guys a better idea of just how big of a problem all of these leakers have been, take a look at this.
Okay, I want to talk to you about these two ICE employees. On Friday, you announced that you'd found two ICE employees who were leaking information about incoming DHS raids on illegal immigrants, criminal illegal immigrants. There's also the news that you announced, and I think it's already begun, polygraph testing people within ICE, within various departments of DHS. Were these two individuals that you found leaking information, did you find them through the process of administering polygraphs?
Well, I won't talk about each specific case, but what I will tell you is that we have been utilizing polygraphs for 3 weeks now, and that we do have two DHS employees that are on administrative leave, and they're going to be facing consequences for what they've done to leak these operations. So they could face up to 10 years in federal prison for what they've done. And what they've done is by leaking the information on these ops is they've put law enforcement lives in jeopardy. So we've got a lot of tools. I've got a lot of authorities under DHS. I'm going to use every single one of them to stop these leakers and make sure that they face significant consequences for what they're doing. They're jeopardizing our national security. They're hurting the lives of people who are just trying to enforce the law. And so I'm thankful that we've talked about these two, but I've got several more that will be revealed here soon. And I hope they're an example to everybody else within this federal government that President Trump is enforcing the law. For the first time, we have a president that cares what the laws are in this country, and he's going to enforce them. And he's giving us the tools that we need to make sure that we can follow through on it and people face consequences who break the law.
So, folks, did you catch all of that? This whole deep state leaker problem has become so severe that now President Trump's Department of Homeland Security is actively issuing polygraph lie detector tests to suspected leakers, with two leakers already having been found, both of whom are now facing federal felony charges with 10-year prison sentences. And then, on top of all of that, because this deep state leaker problem has proven to be so pervasive, President Trump's FBI and his DOJ have created a joint task force that's aimed at identifying, removing, and criminally punishing leakers as well. And so, folks, this is where today's story gets absolutely crazy. But before we get to that, I do want to say real quick that if you guys enjoy the daily news updates, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. But okay, check this out. During President Trump's first presidential term, he talked a lot about the anti-American deep state and all of the Washington, D.C. swamp beasts, but unfortunately, he didn't have the support apparatus with which to actually identify and remove all of these people. However, this time around, President Trump came prepared, and so now heads are beginning to roll, figuratively speaking. As you all know, because the Democrats are incapable of winning free and fair elections, they've resorted to forming shadowy cabals within the federal government in order to undermine and subvert President Trump's America First agenda, the very same agenda that all of us just got done overwhelmingly voting for. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is why President Trump just gave the order to fire over 100 staffers on the National Security Council. As many of you know, the National Security Council, or the NSC, has long been a bastion of the anti-American deep state. In fact, President Trump recently discovered what can only be described as an anti-American cabal operating within the council itself. So this is why just yesterday afternoon, over 100 National Security Council staffers were given less than 1 hour to clear their desks and to vacate the building, further proving President Trump's zero-tolerance policy for anyone that aims to undermine or subvert the America First agenda. As President Trump has now discovered, many of these deep state saboteurs inside of the NSC have actively been leaking sensitive information, doing everything they can to undermine President Trump's agenda and trying to interfere specifically with President Trump's foreign policy negotiations. To put things very simply, as many of you have noticed, President Trump's foreign policy agenda is that of diplomacy and peace negotiations, But as it would seem, many of these NSC staffers have been actively trying to push the United States into getting involved in various foreign wars, namely in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe. And as you all know, that is absolutely not going to fly now that President Trump is back in the White House. President Trump's policy is America first, and he is the one in charge, not a bunch of unelected staffers for the National Security Council. And so here's the reality. Many of these NSC staffers were given their jobs by various previous presidential administrations, almost none of which share President Trump's vision, our vision, for the future of America. The truth is, almost all of these NSC staffers were long-term careerists and political opportunists appointed by the previous presidential administrations that caused all of our nation's problems in the first place. Believe it or not, many of these people genuinely think that it's our American obligation to continue screwing over Americans while we send billions of dollars abroad and get involved in every single foreign war across the entire planet. So needless to say, many of these NSC staffers that have now been fired just aren't compatible with President Trump's America First agenda, the agenda that we all voted for. And so this is why, now that he's gotten rid of all of these deep state saboteurs, President Trump is in the process of entirely rebuilding the National Security Council in accordance with his America First agenda. Going forward, if you're not on board with actually putting America first, you are gone, no questions asked. So really, President Trump's purge actually restores the National Security Council back to its original purpose of maintaining national security and to help the president navigate delicate foreign policy issues with deference to the president, not to undermine the president at every single opportunity. And so really, here's the big takeaway. President Trump's restructuring of the National Security Council sends a very clear message across the entire country. Going forward, federal agencies need to serve the American people and the president that they overwhelmingly elected, not the entrenched Washington, D.C. establishment that's done absolutely nothing other than destroy this country. And so, folks, really, this is just yet another example of President Trump putting America first, and so yes, this is exactly what I voted for. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we wrap up, I do want to say real quick that we officially have a Morse News Twitter page as well as a Morse News Facebook page. So if you use either of those platforms, please go down below and drop a follow in order to get breaking news updates that relate to everything we talk about here in the YouTube videos. But everyone, that is going to be a wrap for today's video, so please go down below and drop a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this. Please like the video while you're down there, and like I said earlier, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. Thank you all very much for tuning in today, and of course, as always, stay safe.